Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and Chag Sameach. It is Sukkot. Sukkot is the only festival in the Torah on which we are commanded to rejoice, to be happy. Reminds me a little bit of the song, and I'm sure that many of you remember it. Don't worry, be happy. On Sukkot, we are commanded to be happy, even if only for this week. And this week, our Torah portion actually comes from the book of Leviticus, where we are given the commandments for Sukkot. And on the first day, you take the product of the hadar tree, branches of palm trees, boughs of leafy trees, willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before Adonai for 7 days. You shall observe it as a festival, and you shall live in booths. All citizens in Israel shall live in booths, in order that future generations shall know that I, Adonai, made the Israelite people live in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I, Adonai, your God. And so this is one of those set times in the Torah, as most of our holidays come from the Torah. But the rules of Sukkot in the Torah are not very detailed. And it turns out that in our tradition, we also have this lack of specificity from many of our commentators. Writing in Tablet magazine, Yehuda Fogel points out that in the rabbinic tradition of the Talmud, even though in contrast, there are a myriad of rules and stringencies about making matzah on Passover, for Sukkot, the halacha is full of leniencies. Be creative. Do what you can in your own situation. The sukkah should be impermanent, permanent enough to last for a week, stable enough, but really not a permanent house. How do we ensure that it's not a house that we would really want to live in? And one of the ways, for instance, is that it only has 3 walls, and the fourth wall is imaginary. If there are gaps in this fragile shelter that you have built for this week in the walls, anyway, if there are gaps in the walls, a branch can be like a wall. The roof should have holes in it, just enough to be able to see the stars and enough to feel raindrops. So again, impermanent, stable enough for a week, yet impermanent. And this seeming contradiction is something that really doesn't lend itself to stringent rules. You have to be creative. You have to be able to be also happy. You have to be able to rejoice, to have a party, to not worry about this structure. So there's a lot of leniency, and it reminds us of the impermanent nature of life at the same time that we're trying to be stable in our Sukkot and in our relationships for this week. So it's what should be an uncomfortable mixture of permanence and impermanence. And this year, I think that is so fitting for where we are in the world, not just in terms of the COVID pandemic, but also in terms of so many social structures. We know what our traditions have been, but we also know the gaps in traditions. We know that some of those traditions, which we view as ideals, perhaps romantically, have been observed more in the breach, in the compromise, than in the adherence to tradition. And this particular year is a time when we really are called upon to be creative, to acknowledge the intent, the emotional and spiritual impact and importance of these traditions, and at the same time, do what we have to do to get by, do what we have to do so that we can, in fact, take time to be grateful for what we have, to appreciate the moment. And when you're living in a sukkah, when you're even just sitting in the sukkah and you say your blessings for having food in the sukkah, for having friends with you in the sukkah, it is um, it is a time to be, in fact, present in the moment, to appreciate whatever it is that we have, whatever we have accomplished. So even though we have come out of Yom Kippur focusing on all the things we need to do, on Sukkot, we are grateful for what we have, for what we have done, for what we have around us, and for who we have around us. And there is a wonderful tradition called the Ushpizin, which is an Aramaic word for visitors, for guests. And in this tradition, we symbolically welcome into our sukkah the spirits of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Joseph, David, Solomon. We welcome Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel, Deborah, Judith, Yael, Huldah. We welcome in the spirits of our matriarchs, our patriarchs, our wisest forebears. And for many communities, it's also a tradition to open that up and say, well, who else would you include? Those are traditional names from our past, from our distant past. Who would you include among the Ushpizin today? And of course, for many of us, our Ushpizin would be all of our loved ones, our family members, and our friends who cannot be with us physically. Our neighbors, those whom we have to keep a distance from. We have to make a gesture, whether it is a sign for love and affection or a symbolic, I'm hugging you, I'm hugging you. Think about the people you care about, the people you admire, and welcome them into your sukkah, even if your sukkah itself is virtual. We are such a creative people, and we are so brilliant at creating metaphors and virtual realities. After all, isn't the land of Israel something that was a virtual reality for 1800 years before modern Zionism started to make the state of Israel a modern physical reality? Isn't the hope for freedom and redemption that we see when we light Hanukkah candles, that too is a virtual reality? So we have lots of experience dealing in a virtual world where the world we live in is full of anxiety, uncertainty, difficulty, but we are good at imagining how to live in a different world emotionally and spiritually. And I think this is what this Sukkot particularly calls upon us to do. So while you can see my lulav and etrog behind me, and we shake the lulav and the etrog, and I must say this year's etrog is still a little green, but it will ripen, and it still is fragrant. We shake the lulav, the palm branch, the willow, the myrtle. We shake them, and they are symbols of an older reality from the time of the Torah. And yet we use these symbols. We make metaphors and allegories. The palm frond represents the spine, that we should stand straight and tall. The myrtle represents our mouths, that we should have a wide smile. The hadass represents the eye. The leaf of the hadass is shaped like an eye, that we should have vision and insight. The fragrance of the etrog, that we should always look to sense the best in everyone around us. So we make our own symbols, we renew our traditions, and we create a reality that is rich, that is beautiful, a reality that is kind and inclusive and just. So, this Sukkot, as we live virtually together, as we virtually invite the guests of our imaginations, of our spirits, this Sukkot can still have meaning for us, can have richness, can teach us to appreciate every moment that we have with the people whom we are in relationship, to have gratitude to the Holy One who gives us the power of imagination to create something better and durable and sustaining and so satisfying to the soul, that we can have more than just what we see around us, but that we can always have a vision of our best selves in our best places. May this Sukkot bring you joy, along with gratitude and appreciation for everything in your life that is good, and encouragement to imagine a world where we can be together physically, to imagine a world where we can create safety on many, many levels, physically, spiritually, emotionally, socially, culturally, that we can create a more permanent version of the Sukkah of our dreams. Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.